The road was rough and full of potholes, and the driver must have thought it was great fun to drive at high speed through them, with me on the bonnet trying to hang on for dear life, but finding that there was nothing to hold on to. The windscreen behind me was folded down, with the co-driver's legs on the bonnet, and I felt the muzzle of his rifle in my back and could see that he had his finger close to the trigger. I wondered what would happen to me should I fall off the bonnet, apart from being run over. WD raced right into Spire and stopped outside a fenced-in tennis court where a large number of prisoners were walking about in the sunshine. One of the guards opened the narrow gate. I felt a rough push from behind, stumbled over a door rail or something, and before I knew it, I was lying flat on my belly inside the court. When I got up and dusted myself down, everyone was laughing. I must have looked very funny in that long coat of mine, for someone called me Wigwam, a name which stuck with me for a long time, and when a year later I played football in the American POW camps, my name still appeared on the sheets as inside right Wigwam. I had never really seen any black men from close up before, and there were 2 of them standing guard outside the door. They looked rather forbidding, and those of us who claimed to know the English language could not understand what they were drawing all the time. Captured soldiers were brought in, sometimes on their own, sometimes in groups. Amongst one lot were 3 or 4 officers, looking even more forlorn than the rest. No one wanted to have much to do with them. There was much wild speculation going the rounds about what was going to happen to us. They ranged from being shot to becoming plantation overseers in Red Indian reservations. Many townspeople were now walking about freely in the streets, though during the hours of darkness a curfew was in force. A lorry arrived at the gate loaded with cardboard boxes. We had to queue, and each of us received 2 tins. One was called K and the other C ration. In them we found meat, biscuits, ground coffee, powdered milk, sugar, and sweets. It was as if manna from heaven was raining down on us. For the likes of us, real coffee had been unattainable for years. There was only one cold water tap inside the tennis court. We stirred our powder into it as well as we could and walked around and drank it like that. We reckoned with food and beverage of that quantity and quality we could have conquered Europe and the world. After dark, the temperature dropped sharply, and in the early hours we had ground frost. We had been given cardboard for bedding, which we folded out along the fences, and all those who had to get up and keep walking did not laugh any more about my wigwam coat in which I lay snugly rolled up. I thought about the coldest temperature I had encountered in Russia, -54 degrees centigrade. What did this little ground frost matter to me now? Early next morning we were taken away by lorries. Most of the drivers were black, and they drove like devils. One lorry overturned and was lying at the bottom of an embankment. We could hear the shouts and the cries, and saw the prisoners crawl out from underneath like eels, those who could still crawl. What a way to die a day or so after having escaped the war alive! Our first destination was a farm near Baumholder, where we were herded through a tunnel entrance into a large yard with a dung heap in the middle, which was surrounded on all 4 sides by solid buildings. Shortly after, a couple of armies arrived with spades and ordered about a dozen of us, including myself, to dig a trench 6 feet deep, 6 feet wide, and about 20 yards long. Many of us thought that fate had now finally caught up with us, as the measurements were those of a perfect mass grave. Everyone in the yard had become very quiet, except the guards, who were driving us on with "up, up, up." I noticed that a concentration of our lads was forming near the entrance and kept a close eye on it. I had no doubt that it would be easy to overpower the guards and take their weapons from them, and was already measuring up the nearest one of them and planning what to do with him. When we had dug about 3 feet deep, a lorry arrived with drums of chemicals to be spread over the corpses, we thought, and wooden beams, which we thought could be for gallows. Cold panic had spread to everyone, By the time a German-speaking army with hammers and a bucket full of long nails arrived, who asked for carpenters and explained that he wanted a structure to be set up over the trench with 2 long beams running parallel to each other from end to end. It was only then that we suddenly understood what the trench and the beams were all about, and the word Scheisshaus went around like a spark. The guards looked puzzled as to why their strange German captives suddenly laughed loudly and all had happy expressions on their faces. I noticed a number of SS men sitting together in a corner of the yard, who were trying to remove their SS insignia from their uniforms. Their arrogance had completely gone, and they looked rather sheepishly at me when I pointed out that their uniforms were after all a different cloth and color and cut. They shrugged their shoulders, probably hoping that the Americans didn't know. In the long run, it did them no good, as their blood group was tattooed into their skin underneath their armpits, which no one could erase. German thoroughness, in this case, had backfired on them. During the night, many new prisoners were brought in, and in the morning there was standing room only. A large lorry convoy took us from there across the Belgian border to the garrison town of Stenay, where we were unloaded onto a broad meadow which stretched along a narrow river behind the old Napoleonic barracks. On the field stood large round tents. In each of them, the ground area was covered with large boulders. About 20 of us were ordered into each tent, and when we started to shift the boulders out, we were stopped by the guards. We soon found that complaining was no good, and that we just had to make the best of it. We had horrible nights. None of us could stretch out on the ground, and we either curled up somehow around the boulders or sat on them all night. Nobody was allowed to go outside except to the lavatory, and we heard the guards laughing at us. The next trek took us to the railway station, where a long train of open coal wagons was awaiting us behind a steam engine. We were lined up on the forecourt and ordered, as a last chance, to throw away all our weapons, like pistols, knives, sticks, bottles, and pieces of metal. I had decided to take a bottle of water with me, which I had hidden under my wigwam coat. After the last warning had been given, spot checks were made, and it was my luck that a big, burly army, I think sadistic inclinations must have made him volunteer for the job, came straight for me, touched me down, and found my bottle. He gave me one mighty blow to my face, which sent me reeling in the dust. I felt blood running out of my mouth and nose, and my immediate reaction was wild fury and the urge to hit back. But when I turned in the dust and saw the legs of other armies moving towards me with their machine pistols at the ready, I very quickly cooled down. I realized that one quick movement could easily be my last, and very slowly picked myself up onto my feet, wiping the blood off my face and joining the ranks of my fellow prisoners. The army swore at me, which I really didn't mind, as I could only understand less than half of anyway. But what I found hard to swallow were the angry reproaches from some of my mates who accused me of having created a dangerous provocation which could have involved them all. Between 40 and 50 of us were loaded into each of the open wagons, as there was only enough space for some of us to sit down. Most had to stand. Everything we touched was covered in coal dust. Our journey lasted about 2 days and took us through some of the industrial regions of northern France. Not once were we allowed off the wagons. At times we got drenched from rain showers, and with the coal dust from the wagons and the spewing fire and ashes from the engine, we soon looked and felt like painted gollywogs. The whites of our eyes took on a pinkish look from the continuous rubbing. Our lavatory business became an acute problem, as we simply didn't have any facilities. We solved the problem in the most simple way. We filled our food tins, and when we came to a crossing, where often a jeering crowd waited for the passing of our train, we emptied the contents over them. Their jeers then turned to furious howls once they realized what they had been covered with. They picked up everything they could lay their hands on and bombarded our innocent mates who were riding at the end of the train and didn't realize what they were being punished for. In Cherbourg, we were unloaded at the main station, where our arrival platform had been barricaded off.
It was about midday, and the sun was shining warmly. Our marching column was protected in the town by an American cordon on each side. It didn't take long for trouble. The townspeople, recently subjected to German occupation, quickly realized that the boot was now on the other foot and decided to make the most of it. Having now developed a thick skin, the jeers and the shouting didn't hurt us much, but the hard objects they threw at us did. I too was hit by some missile on the back of my head. Then one of the young Frenchmen made a terrible mistake. Somehow he managed to break through the American cordon, and he must have thought that he could freely lash out at anyone in reach and get away with it. It was his bad luck that he was mistaken. Hardly a command was necessary for the action that followed. He was pulled into our column, and in barely a matter of seconds, while the armies were helpless to intervene, bare fists settled the matter. When he was finally dragged away, the blood on the cobblestones bore witness to man's
horizon before us. We were greeted by the famous Statue of Liberty, which we had all seen photos of, having sailed up a short stretch of the Hudson River. New York was there itself, with its mighty bridges, enormous skyscrapers, and the never-ending traffic along the quays. Soon we docked. America, we have arrived. What are you going to do with us? We picked up our belongings and walked down the narrow gangway, at the bottom of which stood an officer with a counting machine. Next to him hovered someone who kept shouting, "Schnell, Schnelli." Coming halfway down, I saw that he had a pin in his hand, which he poked into the bottoms of those he could catch. Of course, everyone tried to get past that little fellow as quickly as he could, and we heard later that never before had a troop ship been emptied in such record time. How effective a small pin can be. We had arrived on the 8th of May, 1945, and having no idea what was happening anywhere, we were a bit surprised when an army shouted to us while we were still in the holds that the sirens were howling all over New York because Hitler was dead and the war was over. We received the news with a strange and confused feeling. I didn't quite know whether I should feel sad or shout hooray. We did not even feel like discussing it amongst ourselves, as the dead weight of the Nazi past was laying heavily on us all. All us younger ones, like myself, could not really imagine a Germany without Hitler, and none of us had ever dared say anything adverse about our Führer while he was alive. We could not be all that sure that he was really dead now, anyway. At the quayside, we had to put every single piece of our belongings on the ground before us, and we were thoroughly searched. Since my last payday, I had carried a wad of Reichsmark notes in my breast pocket, which the soldier searching me put into his own. Our troop train consisted of modern coaching stock, and we were surprised by the comfort of the soft seats on them. We found glossy brochures which dealt with German crimes in the concentration camps. The photos shocked us, and at first I believed that they were fakes, but when later on I had a second look, I could see that they were real, and, reminding myself of so many events I had witnessed in Russia, the sheer enormity of the crime against humanity I had collectively partaken in took a clearer conception in my mind. Germany, my Germany, what depths had you fallen to? I found it strange that none of us felt in the mood to even discuss what was in the brochures. Leaving the dock area, we saw much seediness, but found the outlying districts more pleasant to look at. We were impressed and surprised by the many cars in the factory and other car parks. Having in mind that almost no worker in Germany owned a car, we pondered how rich America must be. Workers having cars. We passed through Baltimore, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Oklahoma City, Amarillo, and El Paso, all names which to most of us had that touch of mystic. In Oklahoma, the earth was red, and when we crossed the Rockies, pulled and pushed by 3 enormous oil-fired steam engines, we were very impressed. Rolling through the Texas plains, we saw the nodding horses, the oil derricks, and then came the Rio Grande River, which, to our surprise, was almost dried out and was no more than a trickle. On the other side was Mexico, a neutral country, and the fleeting thought occurred to me of a jump, a short run, and then freedom. But the train rolled on, and there were armed guards on each coach, and having come alive from the steppes of Russia to the Rio Grande, what was the point of risking one's life after that? After that came the semi-deserts of New Mexico and Arizona, with their enormous cactuses and beautifully shaped mountains, with their distinct layers of sandy rock, which were often flat on the top. All the lavatory doors had been removed so that the guards were able to watch our every activity. The windows were shut all the time, and during the hot day the heating was fully on, and we sweated like pigs while it was turned off during the cold nights. Traveling somewhere through Texas, a friendly American captain came into our coach and told us that he had been to Germany before the war and had liked it very much. He asked us to sing for him Stille Nacht, the famous German Christmas song. As he seemed a nice man, we tried to please him, but under the unusual conditions, it was just impossible to do. The captain understood. We arrived at Florence Camp in the Arizona desert in the early hours of a cool night in the middle of May. Off the train, we were ordered to dump everything we had on uniform, underwear, boots, caps, belts, etc. onto one big heap, which was doused with petrol and then set alight. To watch, it was very hurtful. It was like the cutting of the past from the present in a very dramatic and symbolic way. There I stood in the grace of God, naked, thin, dirty, and forlorn in a strange country. All I had saved was my wristwatch, while photos and papers like army paybooks, etc., had earlier been taken from us and put into envelopes with our names on. We were marched into a large room in a barrack where two muscular soldiers in white coats stood on either side of the door, grabbed us, and pumped injection needles into our upper arms. I saw one of us pass out on the floor, and none of us really felt like laughing. We were passed on to a group of rough barbers who plunked us onto low stools and with electric shavers cut all the matted hair off our heads. When we came out, we could hardly recognize each other, and when I looked in a mirror, I could hardly recognize myself. It was awful. From there, we were shouted into shower rooms. When the warm, soft water ran down over our heads and emaciated bodies, there came a most lovely feeling of complete relaxation, which I had not known for years. It was as if all the nasty past, the hell I had been through, was washing away from me and running with a gurgling sound down into the grill beneath my feet. Even the soap was genuine, not the air-sat stuff which did not even foam. That had been our lot since the beginning of the war. We were each given a nice clean towel, but when I picked it up to dry myself, I found that someone had pinched my wristwatch from underneath it. The moment in my life had arrived when I possessed absolutely nothing, and in a strange way, it gave me a feeling of freedom which never in my life had I felt before. We lined up at a counter and were issued with underwear, socks, soft leather shoes, and an American khaki uniform, all of which was brand new. After all the dirt I had endured and become used to for years, it was impossible to describe the feeling of fresh new clothes on the skin of my body. I stepped around, ran a few steps, shrugged my shoulders, bent over, threw my arms about, and felt like a being newly reborn. From there, we crossed a dark square, up a few steps, and entered a well-lit dining room. On either side, along the walls, were long, clean tables with benches attached, and we were asked to sit down, when German prisoners appeared from a counter to serve us with a full, warm meal. It was one of the loveliest I have ever tasted. Few of us felt like talking, and someone opposite asked me to give him a kick so that he could be sure that he was alive. Afterwards, coffee was brought in from a large can, and real creamy milk and sugar as much as we liked. And all this happened at about 3 o'clock in the morning. From there, we were escorted into white wooden barracks. The floors creaked. Everything was immaculately clean. The beds were spaciously arranged in rows and had soft mattresses with clean bed linen and eiderdowns. The smell,
the feeling, and all this for us, the prisoners? I put my head on the clean, soft pillow. There was no conversation, only hushed words, as everyone was deep in his own thoughts. Someone switched the lights off, and I could see the beams of a white moon playing onto the foot of my bed. There was utter peace. Tired as I was, I wanted to lie there for a while and think my thoughts. My thoughts went home to my mother. If only she could see me now, and I didn't even know how she had come through the bombings and the end of the war, and whether she was even alive. And then my thoughts went back to Russia, without which the whole thought of the war and me now lying here in Arizona had no meaning. It was all part of each other. Slowly dropping off into dreamland, I thought of Ajax, walking with him down that pothole village street in Munkovo, of the old man in the hut holding the hand of the little girl, of Anna and of Boris. What was the meaning of my life? We stayed at Florence for a few weeks, though in the beginning I did not feel well, probably from the injections and the unaccustomed heat. I soon became alive again. We had little to do but eat and sleep, and in between we played football and chess and walked around camp in the cool evenings and talked about home. A fair German library had been set up in camp, probably provided by ex-compatriots living in the area, and I did a lot of reading. There were works by the great philosophers Kant, Schopenhauer, Hegel, Feuerbach, Nietzsche, and I struggled through many, though having to admit that because of my insufficient education, I benefited little from their wisdom. Each afternoon, Arizona, a sandstorm arrived and blew all around us. When we heard its howling and saw its dust cloud coming,
2-day journey back to Montana and went into camp near the town of Harding. In working parties, we were taken by lorry as far as the Canadian border and to the south into the state of Wyoming to harvest sugar beets. Our camp was not far from the Little Bighorn River, where General Custer had made his last disastrous stand. At times, we worked in Red Indian reservations, and all of us, having read about Venatu and Uncas, the last of the Mohicans, were rather disappointed at what we thought was the obvious degradation of the people. There was much drunkenness, bad housing, and cleanliness seemed sadly lacking. Once the work had been done, we traveled back to the Mexican border and arrived at a small working camp near Casa Grande, a Spanish-looking place right in the wilderness of Arizona. The camp was surrounded by rugged mountains of grotesque shapes rising out of the flat, dusty plain full of tall cactuses. From there, we went cotton picking right down to the Rio Grande. While racism had been a major ingredient in our theoretical upbringing, we, in fact, had very little practical experience of it. Where I had grown up, there had only been poor white working-class people. At Casa Grande, we found that we were the only white cotton pickers. All the others were either black or Mexicans who had come over the border and who often had trouble with the overseers and were badly underpaid. Food and life for us was good, but suddenly we received a severe jolt. A new camp commandant arrived. He ordered the entire camp to line up on the big square and made a speech in English, which was translated into German sentence by sentence. He said that he was a Jew and proud of it. Several members of his family had suffered the worst in concentration camps, and he was now glad to be in a position to settle matters with us. He would see to it that we would receive the same quantity and quality of food which had been handed out in the concentration camps, and we would have to do the same workload. There would be no more sport. Musical instruments would be withdrawn, our payments would be stopped, the washrooms closed, and only one standpipe would be in operation for the whole of the camp. I could understand his attitude and did not complain. I just relate the facts. His program started the next morning. For breakfast, we had a cup of black coffee, unsugared, and a dry bread roll. The food going with us on the lorries was equally miserable, and when we came back in the evening, there was the same story. We had a chat round and then a meeting, and next day on the cotton fields we picked no more than 1/10 of what we normally did. The farmers, who probably had to pay the camp for our work, wanted to know what the matter was. After arriving back in camp, it was very late that night when the dinner bell gonged, but there was a big meal on offer, and a very good one, and none of us saw the Jewish camp commandant ever again. We celebrated Christmas at Casa Grande and rigged up a tree with real candles, around which we sang our traditional Christmas songs. Many American motorists stopped on the lonely highway outside the camp to listen to our singing and clapped and asked for more. The nights at that time were very cold, and in the mornings the earth was covered with raw frost. We lit huge bonfires in the fields around us, around which we lazed in our thick coats until about 10 minutes after the sun had taken the frost off the cotton, and the farmers allowed us to start picking. Half an hour later, our coats came off, and shortly after that, the shirts as well. From there, we were taken back to the main camp at Florence, where we were engaged in boring, routine army camp work. One day, after he had chatted to me the day before, a friendly officer, Lieutenant Hightower, asked me whether I would like to work in the PX, American Army shop and canteen, as he probably thought that my English was good enough for that. I would have agreed to anything which would take me out of camp. Next morning, I reported to the gate and was taken by a guard to the PX. It was like a big department store in which everything imaginable could be bought. I had anticipated that I would work in the stores or as a cleaner or general handyman, and was much surprised when I was taken into Lieutenant Hightower's office, where he asked me if I could type. I couldn't. "You will have to learn then," he said. "Are you good at figures?" "Reasonably," I replied. He then took me to a large writing desk in the corner by the window and told me that it was mine to work on. Well, I thought, how about that? Apart from me and Hightower, who had his desk behind a partition, there were 2 girls in the office who also had their own desks. They were about my age, made me very welcome from the first, and assured me of all the help I should need. I had little money myself, but they saw to it that in the breaks I had as many cakes and other goodies as they themselves had. Officially, I was not allowed any alcohol, but thanks to the girls, I had beer every day. Never having worked in an office before, I felt bewildered in the beginning, but I soon learned to type and what to do with the filing cabinets, calculating machine, invoices, stamp machine, and so on. I tried my hardest because I wanted to do the job efficiently. When Hightower wanted me, he simply shouted, "Henry," from behind the partition, and I rushed in with, "Yes, Lieutenant." He often wrote rough letters by hand, which I had to type. I enjoyed work there tremendously and hated the weekends when I could not go into the office. Apart from being his secretary, I also acted as his doorman. It happened sometimes that visitors without an appointment objected to being barred from coming into the office by a German prisoner. I lorded it all right when it suited me, and whenever there were complaints in that respect, Hightower, not mentioning the girls, always backed me to the hilt. I worked in the office for about 2 months and regretted it a bit that the 2 girls were watching each other. They were both fine persons. We came to know each other very well. They helped me greatly, and I repaid by covering up for them and taking the blame for the mistakes they sometimes made. The announcement that we were going to leave Florence camp was a hard blow for me. On my last day, the girls arranged an office party in my honor, to which only Hightower and a few others were invited. The desk in the middle was covered with a white tablecloth, and on it were cakes the girls had baked for me, and glasses and bottles, and Hightower, screwing his face a tiny bit at first, did not object. Everyone gave a little speech with a toast, and when it came to me, I was hardly able to say anything because I had a great big lump in my throat, but my friends understood and came into my arms to hug me and kiss me, and there were a few embarrassed tears, with Hightower again showing no objection. As a final act, I had to hand in my gate permit card,
and then both girls took me back to that ugly fence, snuggling lovingly against me. The gate guards did not like what they saw coming towards us. One of them was rude, but received a vicious lashing from the girls' tongues. It being a dark night, the guards shone the full power of the searchlight on our parting scene. Once inside the camp, I walked along the barbed wire, while the girls walked parallel with me on the outside. We laughed and waved through kisses and gave all sorts of promises with hope for the future. Oh, how I hated that fence! Once a week, a re-educational meeting took place in the large canteen. Many of us went. Attendance was not compulsory. A German-speaking American chairman opened up with a short introduction, and then it was mainly up to us to discuss anything of interest or topical. Feelings often ran high in this attempt to introduce us to democratic values, and we were encouraged to speak our minds without fear, which was not an easy thing for us to do, since the war had been over for more than a year. Critical remarks about our own actions and policies now came slowly to the fore. What struck me was that the Nazis were always sitting at the back of the hall, and though engaged in much heckling, seldom contributed anything thoughtful. I never liked to stand up under all the eyes and say my part, but when one day an elderly prisoner urged the audience to be realistic and truthful and accept that horrible crimes against humanity had been committed by us, all hell broke loose at the back, with someone saying, "Ah, well, that was war." I raised my arm from sheer excitement, regretted it in an instant, but was called by the American chairman to speak. At first, stuttering a bit, I challenged forcefully that if that was so, then we should think about the origins of war and not accept it unthinkingly without asking questions. We all knew, I claimed, that a war must have economic, financial, social, and industrial roots, and that enormous profits had been made out of it, while others had paid with their lives. And if we truly wanted to stop another one from breaking out again, then we must look for those roots. There was much hissing from the back, but no one challenged me. But when I walked away afterwards, a group of Nazis stopped me and told me in no uncertain terms to shut my stupid trap in the future. Had I not been a member of the camp football team, they would have given me a good hiding there and then. The next trip took us to the California Pacific coast. The transport was by road and covered a distance of several hundred miles. While most of us traveled on the backs of lorries, I was lucky and traveled with two of my mates in a
Screwed up his face as if he was annoyed and looked over to the lawyer, asking him about the legal position of it all. The latter, who had been laughing and seemed somewhat unprepared, cut his cackle short and started looking through one of his thick books. Then he seemed to have a bright idea. "On what Effenberger Freiter do you base your contention?" Of course, I had no idea, and looking at my mates, they did not seem to have one either. But then I shot out with the only thought I had, and said, "Geneva Convention." "Right," the lawyer said, smiling all over his face, and realizing probably that I had walked into the trap good and proper. "What section and what article of the convention are you referring to?" Well, I was conquered, and what was more, I knew it. And when I looked at my mates, I saw only empty faces. "Well, that's it then," said the colonel, and he mumbled something about wasting valuable time for nothing. Directing his gaze at me, he said, "And the next time you make an official complaint, to which we are good enough to listen, please prepare it properly. If I were you, a Effenberger Freiter, with your history behind you, I would not mention the Geneva Convention ever again." All that I could do was stare back at him in defiance, and thought it better to let it be. The meeting was now closed, and we all filed out into the sunny morning. But now the black SS wanted to know, "When are we going home? When are we going home?" My two mates, being crafty buggers, pointed to me to come out with the answer. Afterwards there was howling and shouting, some nasty words saying that it was all my fault. It was there and then, on those steps of the Nansen hut, that I decided never again to act as a democratic spokesman for anyone ever again. Soon we were split up, and with about 200 or 300, I was put on a train transport south and arrived on a dark night in the town of Romsey in Hampshire, England. From the train window it had been interesting to observe, especially as we had come straight from America, with Germany, France, and Russia strong in our minds. In many ways, England was a strange country. That narrow channel of water seemed to have made much difference over the centuries. Most things seemed small and old-fashioned. The rows and rows of houses in the towns, with their small backyards and gardens, seemed cramped. The people were friendly enough, but strangely reserved, and life generally had an unhurried flow, so very different from America and the continent of Europe. And yet there was something likable about it all. From Romsey Camp, we worked on farms all over Hampshire and beyond. We had accepted our fate now, worked hard, and caused no trouble. Those who lived out on the farms had very good relations with the farming people, and on the whole were treated very well. From Romsey, I was transferred to an outcamp in a beautiful old country house called Hazelhurst near the village of Cohampton. It did me much psychological good, as it gave me a feeling of freedom which I had not had for many years. From Hazelhurst, I was transferred to a camp near the small town of Bishop's Waltham, and was employed to work in the garden of a family in the lovely village of West Meon, where I was treated with much understanding and friendliness. It made me especially happy to be with the children, who were always lovingly around me. From Bishop's Waltham, we were taken to a camp just outside Southampton in 1948, almost 3 years after the war had ended, and from there I was released from captivity shortly after. From the age of 18 to 26, probably the most formative years of anyone's life, I had been a soldier and a prisoner, and there had been many moments when I wished that I had never been born. Suddenly, I was set free like a bird, unused to it, and I found it difficult at first. In me was a great feeling of guilt, but also anger, frustration, and disappointment. How was I to come to terms with all that? A prisoner transport took me back to Germany. My parents were now both dead. Everything we had been destroyed in the bombings. The clothes I stood up in and the blue American kit bag I carried on my shoulder were my only possessions. What was I now to do with my life? Before I left England, I had been assured by Colonel Courage, the brewer for whom I had worked as a farm worker, that if I ever wanted to come back to England and work for him, he would welcome me back. Germany irritated me. There was no attempt even to talk about the war and what had happened and why. I had no home, there was much unemployment, and I felt lost and alone. And when a close relative told me that the defeat of Germany was the fault of people like me, who had had no faith in the Führer, and who had not given their all in the struggle, I had had enough. I took my kit bag and went back to England. After only 4 weeks working on Colonel Courage's farms near Crondall and Preston Candova, and playing football for the Bentley village team, I slowly felt I was returning into the circle of humanity. Then the colonel employed a lovely au pair girl from Switzerland. In those peaceful and beautiful surroundings, in that Hampshire village, how could we help falling in love? We married in Switzerland in 1952. In 1954, a son was born to us, and in 1956, a girl. I started to work as a railway porter at Alton, became a signalman, and then stayed on until my recent retirement. My dear wife died in 1980. The feeling of guilt for what in a collective way I have done to others, especially the people of Russia, lies very heavily on me. Coming to the evening of my life now, I sometimes wonder what it has been: a drama, a tragedy, a crime, or a comedy. I cannot be quite sure. I have regrets for the suffering I have caused others, but no complaints about what others have done to me.